Thank you for that. And I can just go ahead and start and say thank you. So I'm talking about congressional oversight and congressional lawyering as transparency issues, and we can go on to the next slide. Before I'm counsel at Protect Democracy, and before I came to Protect Democracy, I worked at the Office of Legal Counsel. You can see a photo of the hallway where the Office of Legal Counsel is at the Department of Justice. And while I was at the Office of Legal Counsel, I developed, one could call it an appreciation, certainly an understanding that of the dominant perspective on separation of powers within the executive branch. And that perspective you can see here from a Choice James Madison quote. We can find James Madison quotes that cut completely in the other direction, but this particular one is basically ambition must be made to counteract ambition. Congress and the executive branch are at war, they are in battle, and the best way to promote constitutional interests is to kind of fight each other. I don't particularly endorse that view, but when that's the view that the executive branch adopts, it's important for Congress to understand it and to bring some ambition of its own. So let's go to the next slide. So Congress needs to bring it. What does it mean for Congress to bring it? Step one, ensure that congressional subpoenas for testimony and for information are enforceable. There's a whole history here I could go through about how we've, and thank you, how we've ended up in the current situation where the executive branch often feels like it can ignore congressional subpoenas. I won't bore you with that. Instead, I'll tell you what we should do to fix it. There is legislation right now, Title IV of the Protecting Our Democracy Act, HR 5314. A companion bill has not yet been introduced in the Senate. And the bill would do three basic things. Number one, create clear requirements for compliance. Actually say that you have to respond and create a statutory right. Next slide. Number two, expedite civil enforcement procedures so that the executive branch can't run out the clock as we saw happen in the prior administration. This would mean creating an explicit right of action for the House and Senate, so you can't have like litigation over one actually exists or not, and providing a direct appeal to the Supreme Court from the district court so that the Court of Appeals don't become a place where the litigation slows down. Also preserve the interbranch accommodation process because that is important. And litigation would probably act as a backstop here, right? You wouldn't actually litigate all the time, but knowing that it's actually a real threat and a timely one makes accommodation work better and in a more balanced way. And finally, enhance deterrence for noncompliance by authorizing courts to impose monetary penalties for certain subpoena recipients at high enough levels of government. Continue. So step two, what else can you do? They're bringing lawyers. Congress needs to bring lawyers. Counteract their lawyering with your lawyering. Next step. So, one way that the executive branch exerts its power is by releasing opinions. That's actually a transparent move, executive branch OLC opinions, or just advertising the existence of opinions that say the executive branch can't do something. And in setting forth legal arguments or advertising the fact that they exist, the executive branch is taking advantage of the notion that because something is backed up by lawyers, it must be lawful, right? That lawyering and lawful are equivalent words, and they're not. These opinions often have a strong ratcheting effect where like one slightly stretched argument gets built on top of another slightly stretched argument, gets built on top of another. And next thing you know, we're kind of pretty far from a place where Congress is empowered or where the constitutional checks and balances are working as they should. I want to give some credit to this administration, which I think has done a decent job so far on some particular oversight issues, but there's still many years to go. And so on Congress's end, we need more ambition to counteract the ambition. The Select Committee on Modernization has recommended that the GAO examine the feasibility and effectiveness of a congressional OLC, right? Lawyers to match their lawyers. This was actually, I hadn't realized this till recently, proposed in the 1970s as part of the post-Watergate reforms, put into a few different bills. But the executive branch pushed back, and there were various things got lost in debates, and it never actually happened. So what could such an office do? It can respond to or make available to congressional offices, depending on how it's designed, potential responses to executive branch analyses on separation of powers issues. We have offices saying to us all the time, well, the executive branch says we just can't do this. And Congressional OLC would help you explain why actually you can. Now there are challenges, right? Congress is, look, all branches of government are political, Congress expressly so. And if there's divided Senate and House, what does a congressional OLC look like in a situation like that? I think these are things that implementation can solve for. And there may be areas of focus that are more direct to Congress's interests, such as the interest of ranking members to get information from the executive branch, which Senator Grassley and Senator Wicker were leading the charge on during the Trump administration, and which should be a bipartisan issue. So there may be places where we can kind of take advantage of shared bipartisan interests. And so these are important implementation questions for GAO to take up. Stay tuned on this one. And that is it. I wanted to thank everyone and apologize again for the technical difficulties. And thank you, Taylor, for taking us through the slide so well.
Thank you, Erica. Obviously, OLC issues are something that we've been working at a lot on demand progress's end, and so it would be great to see a robust OLC within Congress, of course, with the proper transparency built in, but that would be a very good idea. And next up, we have Anna Masoglia, investigative researcher at Open Secrets on transparency around foreign money in U.S.